Welcome to the next presentation in our series designed to help businesses making small amounts of hazardous waste comply with New Hampshire's rules. In this presentation, we're going to talk about the first few pages of the SQG self-certification form with a little additional information about a second form known as the RCRA-C Site Identification Form. As part of the SQG self-certification, you'll be mailed or emailed two forms. The first is the self-certification form, which you'll use to inspect your hazardous waste storage area, get you more familiar with the wastes at your business, and introduce you to the rules that apply to them. This form might seem a little intimidating at first because it's 6 pages long, but we made these presentations to walk through each page and help explain what we're asking for. You can watch them at your own speed and re-watch things that you forgot or found hard to understand. The second form you'll get is called a RCRA-C Site Identification Form, which we also call a notification form. This form is filled out by every business that makes, transports, or receives hazardous waste, and it's used to tell DES general information about your business and the hazardous waste activities that go on there. We're only going to look at the notification form very briefly and spend almost all of our time discussing the self-certification form. Let's start by looking at the front page of the self-certification form. Here's what it looks like. The front page of the form contains information describing your business name, address, and EPA identification number. If you aren't sure of your EPA identification number, you can look at a recent hazardous waste shipping paper that you've signed. The EPA ID number will be printed on there and should be the same as what's printed on the front of the self-certification form. If it's wrong, or if any other information in this form is wrong, put a line through what is incorrect and write the correct information beside it. Once you're sure that's right, turn the page to Section A of the form. Here, we're asking for contact information and a little more detailed description of your business and its location. This may look like it's asking for the same information that's on the cover sheet, and for some businesses that's true. But often, the business that is the small quantity generator isn't the same location as the person who is the correct contact, such as if a business has multiple locations and one person's responsible for more than one site. We also ask who the property owner is on line number 4. And when we say property owner, we're referring to the owner of the dirt that the business sits on. In many cases, the property owner is the same as the business owner, but it doesn't have to be. Many businesses rent the space that they operate in. This information is especially important because if a business ever closed and abandoned hazardous waste at the site, the property owner could still be liable for the removal of the waste. Let's move on. In Section B, we ask how big of a generator you are. As I mentioned in an earlier presentation, when we use the term generator, it means someone who makes hazardous waste. Depending on how much hazardous waste you make or you store, you'll be classified as one of these sizes of generators. There are 2 sizes determined by how much waste you make or have accumulated on site. Businesses that make a lot of hazardous waste have more rules and are required to attend a full-day training event, but don't have to fill out this form. These generators are known as full quantity generators, or FQGs. If a business makes small amounts of hazardous waste, they have way less regulations, but need to complete this form as a way to learn what they're required to do with their wastes. These are known as small quantity generators, or SQGs. Section B of the form asks you to look at how much waste you make in a calendar month and figure out which of these generator sizes you fall into. If you received this form, then our records say that you are a small generator. But your generator size can change over time, so we're checking to make sure things are still the same for you. If you aren't sure what generator size your business is, you can review our presentation titled, "What is your generator size?" on our YouTube channel to help figure this out. Sometimes a business stops making hazardous waste altogether. If that's true of your site and you aren't ever going to make hazardous waste again, check the box in line 3. Note that there are 2 types of hazardous waste in New Hampshire that have some special regulations. These wastes are used oil being recycled and something called universal wastes. Universal wastes are common hazardous items found in both households and businesses. These include certain lamps, such as fluorescent lamps, rechargeable batteries, the old-style television and computer monitors, mercury devices, such as old mercury thermometers, and antifreeze from internal combustion engine cooling systems. These wastes are hazardous wastes, but we aren't interested in tracking them with this self-certification program. So if you have those items, you don't have to include them when figuring out how much hazardous waste you make. If you don't make any hazardous waste, or you only make used oil or universal wastes, check box 3. I mentioned that as part of the package we mail or email to you, you get 2 forms, the SQG self-certification form and the RCRA site identification form. The next item we look at, section C, refers to both of these forms. You'll probably want both of them in front of you to get through this section. Item C1 asks if your business is still making hazardous waste. Please read through the RCRA site identification form that we sent you and make any changes to incorrect information. Here's a look at all 3 pages of that form. You'll see that the copy we sent you already has all the information on file for your site filled in. Read through each item and make any changes as needed. Remember, put a line through anything that's incorrect, write in the correct information, and sign the form on the last line so we know it was you that made the changes. If all the information is already correct, you don't need to do anything with this form except to sign it. Back now on the self-certification form, let's look at item 2 in section C. Remember in section B there was a checkbox if you weren't making any hazardous waste? If that's the case, here we ask you to tell us the date you stopped making hazardous waste for good. And if you stopped making hazardous waste, also follow the additional instructions in 2A and 2B. Even though you just went through the RCRA site identification form to make updates and corrections, there's one more item to check on page 2 of that form. In item 9A, check the box that says "Not a generator," as shown on this slide. Now, there's a record on the self-certification form to maintain in the hazardous waste files, and a record in the RCRA site identification form to maintain for everybody else interested in your site. That should do it for the RCRA site identification form, so let's go back to the self-certification form and move forward with that. Moving on to page 3, we'll look at section D. Here, we're trying to get a summary of what type of waste you make, and how much. This information also gives us a sense of whether you make the same amount every month or whether you have a lot of variation in how much you make from month to month. Some businesses are seasonal in their operations, and others can vary a lot depending on what contracts they're working on. Let's look more closely at this section. For starters, Section D, number 1, asks you to list the hazardous wastes you make. Again, we don't need you to include used oil being recycled or any of the universal wastes we mentioned earlier. Try to be kind of specific in your descriptions, though. For example, lab waste doesn't tell us a lot about what it is, since laboratories can make all kinds of different wastes. A description of solvent waste or corrosive waste would be better, and a description that names the chemicals might be best, but only if there's room in the space. If there aren't enough lines for all the hazardous wastes you make, feel free to write them on an extra sheet of paper and attach it to the form. In this same section, include how these wastes are made. Here, a general description of the type of process is fine, such as paint gun cleaning or metal plating line cleanout. Now that you've listed what hazardous wastes you make, tell us, to the best of your ability, how much total hazardous waste you make each month. We aren't looking for an average, so please make a best guess to figure out how much you made in each separate month. We realize you won't be perfect, but do what you can. I'd also like you to recognize that how much you made in each month is not the same as how much you shipped, since your shipments are probably infrequent and irregular, not monthly. Section D, number 3, asks how much hazardous waste you have stored at your business at the time you're filling out the form. This gives us a snapshot of how much waste might typically be at your site. Remember, we're only interested in hazardous waste, so don't include dangerous chemical products that you might also be storing. Section D, number 4, is our last question on this page. Businesses that make hazardous waste are required to keep copies of any documentation they used to decide if a waste is hazardous or not on file. That documentation might include copies of product labels, safety data sheets from product manufacturers, lab test results, transporter waste profiles, tech sheets from a product manufacturer, or anything else that provided you with information about the materials and processes you used to make your decisions. That's it for this presentation. You've finished the first 3 pages of the form. Way to go. Next, let's grab this form and get away from our desk to take a look at where our hazardous waste is stored. One of the goals of this form and this program is to have us look at how we're storing our waste to see if we're doing anything wrong. Then we can fix it before it causes any problems. And maybe we'll learn something in the process. The next presentation will walk through how to inspect your waste storage area. We'll try to help you understand what we want and help explain why we have these regulations. We have more presentations to help you understand these and other regulations. But if you'd just like to talk to a person, we want to help. Give us a call at one of these numbers during normal working hours. Please leave a message if we don't connect, and we'll return your call. If email is your preference, we've got you covered. You can reach us at sqg@des.nh.gov.